I'm Paula Ellis of the Knight Foundation, and before we begin our conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about how Bill and I and Ashoka and Knight Foundation got here today. As many of you know, Knight Foundation works to advance communities and journalism. In fact, Knight has invested more than $400 million since 1950 in quality journalism and freedom of expression projects. A more telling number, however, is that in the last 2 years we've invested $100 million in media information. With the digital revolution turning journalism on its ear, we want to make sure the future of news and information is instilled with the traditional journalism values so important in a democracy. Ashoka, like Knight, explores new solutions to problems, both old and emerging. Their focus, of course, is on finding and supporting and advancing social entrepreneurs like you all around the world. So with the $3 million grant from Knight, Ashoka launched its News and Knowledge Entrepreneurs Program, which over 3 years will cultivate 30 social entrepreneurs in journalism. We seek people who strive to invent new strategies and models that more effectively inform, engage, and connect people as active, change-making citizens. We aren't wedded to any one media model. We want fellows to explode our traditional thinking. Later you'll hear from two of these fellows, Gregor Hackmack and Sasa Vucinic, about their successes. While launching the Fellows Program, Ashoka and Knight Foundation also decided to examine the kinds of innovation going on in the media industry. Using Ashoka's developing mosaic way of thinking, we thought we could begin to map innovation. We wanted to find the patterns so we could better talk about what's happening around the world. So we created a framework of media trends, which I will share with you in a moment. I'd like to emphasize, though, that this framework is very much a work in progress. We've hashed out some concepts and discovered some emerging patterns, but we need to advance to the next stage to find the best ideas for the future of news and information that we and you as social entrepreneurs can use to advance society. We hope that you will lend your insight during the question and answer portion of this forum. There's much urgent work to be done, and we're really looking forward to you joining us in the work. Before we begin that, I'd like to run through the framework's basic concepts, which you have just before you on the handout. First off, there are two driving forces that are shaping the media landscape. One is technology, which has changed forever the way we create, deliver, and consume information. It also has upended the old business media models, making them increasingly outdated. With new media, publishing is virtually costless, meaning anyone can get into the game of providing or distributing information. Also, content is now more easily accessible to many previously information-isolated peoples, whether via the web, mobile phone, or radio. This is particularly true in the developing world. We all know that the internet is an increasingly popular source for news, but the Pew Center for Research recently reported that for the first time, the internet has surpassed newspapers in the United States as a source for national and international news. The internet has also changed the way we receive news, forcing articles to be delivered individually, separate from the traditional media packages and brands. Another driving force is the shifting relationship people have to information. We are no longer passive information consumers. Rather, we're active information users. We know how to create information, how to edit it, distribute it, comment on it, molding and shaping it each time we come across it. Meanwhile, the one-time mass media market is growing increasingly fragmented and often driven by individual needs. Traditional news organizations are losing ground, and we've seen blogs and ethnic media gaining steam as people gravitate to the work of individual writers and powerful voices. They are moving away from institutional brands. In this slide, you'll see that circulation of members of the Association of Alternative News Weeklies has tripled since 1999. Meanwhile, Spanish-language media has grown exponentially. This does not mean we are less interested in getting information about our world. Quite the opposite. But we are less interested in the traditional sources and pathways to that information. So what are the results? The media are becoming decentralized. Large media organizations no longer are the gatekeepers of information. The explosion of new media and the low cost of using it have made the reins of information available to all. That's good news for people who care about open societies and governments. The uber availability of information promises greater transparency into government, business, and other institutions that have been impenetrable to most citizens. We'll hear more about that later from one of our fellow panelists from Parlamentwatch. There also has been an explosion of storytelling. Throughout human history, storytelling has been the glue that unites communities, and it's the way that people pass news and information. It's the way we share our values. The fundamental dynamics of it, though, are changing. The traditional line between storytellers and audience has diminished, and digital media has allowed new groups of people to tell their own stories, free from traditional outlets. The traditional line between storytellers and audience has diminished, and digital media has allowed new groups of people to tell their stories. This reminds me of a Night News Challenge winner in Philadelphia who is inspiring immigrants to create online digital newscasts, and he uses the city's new broadband system to distribute and tell the stories. We're also seeing aggressive experimentation in storytelling, with innovators using new technology that allow users to mold it. Think of footnote.com. The website posts historical documents, say those from the Vietnam War, and lets people comment on them and post their own family histories and memories. This slide shows the Vietnam War Memorial, with people's comments on the names they find there. It's a powerful experience to browse through. Another element that has evolved is the rise of social networks that encourage engagement and new forms of social expression. In this new world, we are the center of community life. It's a citizen-centered world where people have more power to get involved and shape the public debate. Whether on Facebook or MyFace, email listservs, or Twitter. I don't know if you've all been following the Twittering of the conference. It's very vigorous out there. Everyone is an editor, parsing and recommending information that's consumed by everyone else. The trustworthiness of that information depends on who passed it along and how you feel about him or her. The conversation is at least as important as the information itself. Engagement in these social networks can be both a powerful act of citizenship and a pathway to activism. I think about Ushandi, a site that crowdsources information in a crisis, allowing anyone to submit information through text message of the web. It has been used to map instances of violence in Gaza and xenophobic attacks in South Africa. In the United States, another example is in Park City, Utah, a very weather-dependent community that is trying to do its own part in the fight against global warming. There, the Community Foundation, with funds from Knight, is creating a social network to let people measure their carbon footprint, compare it to their peers, and exchange conversation ideas. Certainly, this new landscape has also brought its own set of challenges, too. At this point, I'd like to bring Bill into the conversation as we begin to explore the challenges and the opportunities which you'll see captured on your handout as the discussion of values and the sustainability of these new media systems. So what Bill and I thought we would do is begin a conversation about how we frame and approach these issues and invite you into the conversation. Later we'll meet the panelists and we'll just see where we go from there. Thank you.
As Paula said, we really hope this will be a working session, and so I want to get you limbered up for this. In addition to asking for questions, we hope you will have suggestions of solutions. And so we will reverse this a bit and ask more questions at this point, but in a frameworking sort of way. And this will be a great success if we push this learning process ahead. Yesterday, we had a meeting with several people who are from the professional journalism field. And John Sisloff of PBS made an observation that moved the ball ahead. I just want to share that with you as an example so that you can challenge his contribution lead so far. He said, the web, we've got this problem of how you finance everything. And the free web seems to be being paid, maybe in significant part, because people are happy to give free services in return for getting a lot of information from us. Well, that sounded very interesting. That runs us right into the privacy issue. How comfortable are we with that? If Google is the most important new publisher, to what degree did they think about privacy? To what degree did we think about it? Well, if the machine is supposed to be learning from us every time someone goes on the web, well, maybe we want that learning. But where is the difference between the web learning from us all doing our things on the web and the point we go over the boundary into privacy? Well, maybe there isn't a particular boundary. Maybe there are boundaries that fit particular situations and particular people. And how do we set that up so that there's choice? Our choice probably is what we would like. So now that's an example where just yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, our thinking was moved ahead very usefully. And anyone here who competes with John today will be wonderful. So now, in thinking about this, we have this wonderful advantage that we have our colleagues, the fellows, the social entrepreneurs around the world, each of whom has not only seen the issue, but they are doing something really important about it that works at scale. And when you see 100, 200 of those mosaic pieces, you begin to see the pattern. And we are, I think, at the stage where we're beginning to see the pattern, or at least the frameworks of the pattern, but we don't know, and I really want to emphasize, we do not know what the 1, 2, 3 most historic opportunities to intervene and change the system are. That's what we're looking for. What are the 1 or 2 things that we could do together that would really change the field? But we don't know. Hopefully we'll get closer today. One thing that I think distorts the conversation at the moment is that every time you pick up the newspaper, or I guess you don't do that anymore, you go on the web, you hear about 5 more newspapers that died yesterday. And so we're really, this conversation is very focused on the institutions of journalism. And there's obviously a difference between journalism and newspapers. But I just think it's very helpful to recognize that the search for truth and making it available to people transcends this particular function. The law is about finding the truth. In whatever it was, 1640 something or other, Harvard was set up with the motto Veritas. So this is the values of journalism are much more universal. And I think that gives us, at least gives me a sense of a great deal of confidence that now that we're focusing on the institutions, we will find solutions to the values issues. So what are what's the larger environment that we're dealing with here? That's the other thing that helps, I think, frame this. it's obvious that the rate of change is accelerating and it's coming at us from more and more angles. So the environment is one, and will be increasingly one, where the types of information we need and the types of role we play will be different because it's defined by that very different world. That world is also one which is moving to organization structures that are very different. We don't have local communities that are isolated anymore. In 1900, 97% of the world's children were growing up in isolated, small local agricultural villages. Gone. Almost no one is in that situation. We're moving to a world of teams all linked together and working together in different combinations depending on the need and the moment. That's a completely different architecture than we've had historically. Well, the web, of course, is brilliant at this. Linkages is one of its greatest strengths. Well, this is not surprising, as I think the web is emerging as almost like you develop a circulatory system when you need it. But we're building it. But a world that's a team of teams where every individual as a team member has the skills and the enjoyment of being able to take the initiative when they have the ball, but we're all working on a team together. This is a very, very different world. Now, what are some of the implications for the types of news and the types of journalism, writing, information gathering, processing? First of all, the users are very interested in the future. In a static world, the future wasn't that relevant. In the world we are in, let alone where we will be in 10 or 15 years, the users want to know where we're going. This is not something that traditional journalism, or I would add traditional scholarship, has been very good at, because the market hasn't needed it, hasn't demanded it, but it now does. The other obvious change in the environment is that we all have to be actors. We all have to be change makers. You cannot be a contributing person in this world of rapidly escalating, more and more complex change unless you are in the game of change. So we're not passive readers. Everyone's understood that. But we're transitioning to a world where we all have to be players. That means that we all have to have skills. Gutenberg led to the spread of literacy. Now, here's another example. In 1900, we didn't need psychology. We didn't have it, I would add. We invented psychology as a field and then popularized it through the media because as we became more and more independent actors, we need that skill. So what sorts of skills do people have to have? And parenthetically, what does that mean in terms of the knowledge that we have to be providing them through whatever sets of institutions? To be a change maker, you have to have social skills, empathy, teamwork, leadership, change making. You also have to have not just media literacy in a defensive sense, but now how do you contribute in a trustworthy, professional way? How do you contribute in teams of teams dealing with knowledge and information? This is an information world, and so I mean, the subject and the viewer, it all becomes very interconnected. So let me just pause for a moment on the values, because I think this is the area that we in the social entrepreneurial field probably need to pay special attention to. This is not driven by the economics. It's driven by something else, and we better be driving it. First of all, as I say, I think accuracy, pressing for meaning, trustworthiness, those are universals that cut across field. That's why we think about this as the knowledge and news field. How does one do trustworthiness? You have brand, the New York Times, Huffington Post. You have personal networks. we all choose who we're going to have in our networks. We choose people who are probably, we think are at least interesting and trustworthy. We have the Google algorithm and others, and obviously we need to do more thinking about trustworthiness. It's an area, I think, of tremendous scientific need, further advancement in psychology, but also how do we build it into the system in much more sophisticated ways. And then finally, there's the law. Government is the only representative body. We need to make some collective decisions. What are they? And what comes first? This is, where do we as a social entrepreneurial field push in terms of trustworthiness, accuracy, professionalism, freedom? I want to pause on privacy for a moment. And this is where John's suggestion of yesterday I thought was so important. There's a market for spyware. I think we need to think about how we develop a market that comes from the largest number of places where we're competing with the people who want the information from us to build defenses. For those of you who have a human rights background, trying to defend against preventive surveillance in the age of dirty bombs is probably not the highest leverage place to put one's efforts. We're going to have preventative surveillance, but how can we expand the universe of human privacy, human rights, and freedom? Well, I think we need to go on the offensive and say we are going to give people a choice about privacy of their information and their lives. Well, that's a major issue in the knowledge and news field. How do we enforce all of this? It's a second set of categories, and there are two dimensions to it. How do you enforce it at any one moment in time? Well, the skills of the users is obviously key. The users, the producers, the combinations, the tools we develop to make that easy. Having more players is really helpful. One of the problems of the big printing press, natural monopoly, oligopoly, is that it's very easy to control. And has been in much of the world. And so, Sasa's work in terms of encouraging independent media is part of the effort to open up that space. Well, how can we make sure that we end up in the world where network effect, that leads in the direction of an even bigger monopoly? Google, eBay, they understand network effect. Well, do we want that? How do we have competition in sources and users and this new architecture? Where are we going to end up? Well, we should think about that. There's also competition and enforcement. In the environmental and securities field, there are the Keton laws. If you see someone is polluting the river and you bring the case, you will get rewarded in the courts for doing that. So you have private competitive enforcement, which is not corruptible. It's an example of the sorts of mechanisms when we look beyond the narrow barriers of the press. And then finally, systems creation. We aren't going to create a new answer that's going to stay there very long. In a world of geometrically escalating change, we have to be constantly, every day, changing the frameworks, staying ahead of the changes. Now, how is our 19th, 18th, 17th century stovepipe traditional way of, pre-modern government going to do that? How are we going to help that change? So I hope that helps a little bit in framing the challenge. And I think we now have our colleagues here who will.
No, I was going to ask. I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
And then you're going to hear my little.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I should
Which
tell you.
he demanded that I do last night, so. And so I missed going out, so you must hear it. But first, Bill, I wanted to see if I could draw you out on a topic I know that's important to you, important to all of us, the matter of empathy, and how that will be enhanced or eroded, or how you see in the new evolving internet world a contribution for us to be able to be more empathetic or not?
Well,
That's a sneak attack.
It's a really good question. One of the difficulties the web has is that although we're beginning to get the visual element, we do lose a lot of the interpersonal connection. We've evolved that over millions of years. When you walk down the street, you know whether you can trust this person. You make judgments every day. Will this woman or man be a good babysitter? Will I make a deal with this person? Will I get in the elevator? Now, those skills we have. And so I think part of the challenge is how do we get the media, how do we evolve this so that it plays to our strength? So that the better we're able to use the new media to in fact be able to judge as well as we can when we're face to face, that is going to help tremendously, and that's a big challenge. Quite aside from the media, I am hugely distressed that society is moving away from talking openly about ethics. We're afraid we're going to confuse discomfort with otherness, with discomfort with trustworthiness, and so that's something that I hope we can avoid in this area. The emergence of psychology and its popularization is an example of how this can be done. Now, I'm actually very optimistic because in a world of very rapid change where everyone has to be a change maker, anyone who is in that ballet, being powerful for good, but just being powerful, if they do that in a way that hurts other people or other institutions, they're out. And so we have an editing device that removes people who are not skillful at this. Now, how do we help people get there? How do we make sure that every young child masters empathy? That's not a journalism issue, but journalism can certainly help by framing the issue. How many parents, how many school administrators know that they're failing if there's one second grader that hasn't mastered empathy? So there's a reason that we've evolved this skill to be able to know whether or not we can trust people as one of the most fundamental skills we have. And in a global team of teams where you're constantly being put together with people, knowing that we have a trustworthy system and trustworthy people, and we can sense that because people really are trustworthy, I think it's completely central for the design of the system.
I'm sure we'll get back to this notion of trust. It certainly is the currency of news and knowledge, I believe, and relationships. I did do my homework assignment at Bill's urging, and so I feel compelled to share it with you. I did just a couple of notions that, so I'm a journalist of more than 30 years, and eagerly hoping to nudge the evolution of this in some way for the betterment of all of us. Some thoughts as I look at it and work in it that I just wanted to share some thoughts with you. First of all, this is very, I know, primitive to everyone here, but information is the fundamental driver of systems. Whether it's a political system, a financial system. We've referenced Darwin before, so we all really understand the role of information as the agent of learning and either adaptation and that. So I like to take a really foundational approach to information, and I'd invite you all to think about the systems in which you're operating and the information flows. I know folks think about them, but you might to think sort of more systemically about what it means. And so because of that, people want to have access to the inputs of the flows. They want to control the flows in the form of not allowing for a free press or a vigorous exchange of ideas. They want to manipulate them in the form of propaganda and other forms that we know, all of which is much alive in our currently new chaotic world. So I think a foundational thought about systems and the role information plays in all systems, and we, of course, want it to be free-flowing, but not everyone does. And so a discussion about power arises out of all of that, and I'm not going to begin here to have a discussion about power, but as this new world emerges, it's something I think we'll want to work on. You know that some of the cliches about journalism are they speak truth to power, or they hold power accountable, or they have too much power, but sometimes people forget to put that on the table. It's a very primary part of news and information. What are the power relationships? And so how are those going to change? All sorts of institutional power has been amalgamated over more than 100 years in certain types of news institutions that we now see fading. So what will the new world look like in terms of that? Often when we think about news and information, the first instinct is towards civic processes. And it's an important instinct because it does underpin our freedoms, our ability to participate in our shared governance. But I think there are some other important things to think about in the bundle of things that went on with news. Bill touched on most of them. I want to just highlight some. This whole matter of community and how do we form a community? Who's in the community? Who's outside the community? How do we reflect the community back? All of that has been a function of news. And in an online world, we say we can create bigger, different communities. This gets to the issue of trust, but we spend a lot of time thinking about this matter of community. And I would want to think a lot about then what is the role of the individual in this community. So riding right along with that idea is that news actually was quite an anthropological enterprise. So if you think of it as a Google search, of course you know you'll be missing a lot, because the reason probably that you want your enterprise in a news story or the individuals who you're working with in a story have nothing to do with information search. What it's about is partly a norming process, the way a society says, what are our norms here? What are our shared norms? Who's outside our norms? When will things that were once taboo become norms? I was deeply involved in the women's movement, the redefinition of news. You would not have seen an education story in a U.S. newspaper on the front page prior to the involvement of women who were able to have content areas that became normative that were not normative at the time. So there's just a lot about norms, and you know that. And that's actually where most of the conflict, I would say, happens when people are at odds with a media organization. It tends not to be around the facts. It tends to be around these other grayer matters of norming. There are similar issues about culture. How do we transmit cultures and that? You could read and learn about food just as a way of cooking, but it's mostly there to transmit cultural norms and identities, to try to create shared understanding, maybe even empathy every now and then, and they're all host of content areas that you can look at. So the idea here that I'd like you to think about is that there's a function well beyond information, knowledge, and civic processes, but people tend to sort of first go to civic processes. And then there's the whole matter of how will we come to public judgment? How do we have our public discourses? Do we have a shared set of information from which to discourse, or what will that look like? And I would say that most of that discourse is always around values collisions. So the sort of enervating thing about news is always about values.
and a set of values collisions or trade-offs that people have to sort of dialogue through, hopefully. Some will command control, but it would be better to come to a collaborative spirit about them. So just thinking about the norming anthropological aspects. Another thing I wanted to share is that news assumes action. It assumes action. It doesn't really, it's not meant to just sit there. It stimulates all type of actions. And what's one of the more fascinating things to me right now is the way the relationships between information, delivery of information, and action are changing. What are the activation points? It's becoming more of a continuum, and it's happening more and more in cycle time, if this is in a shorter cycle time. So increasingly from the footing of a journalist, I would say, are you an advocate? Are you a journalist? What's the difference there? And I think Peter Omidyar likes to say all the lines are going away. I think this is a really interesting line that's changing, the relationship between information and action. And then I am winding down. Just to underscore that news is a process really about discovery, understanding, sorting out our belief systems and our values. I mean, the reason the story about distributing abortion information is news is because that's a values issue. So really underlying most of these things are our civilization trying to talk to each other about values in the form sometimes of parables that appear as news. So Bill, did you want to ask me anything?
I think I'm vindicated from twisting your arm last night. Paula has not only been a journalist, I think she's one of the most conceptual and thoughtful people I've met in the field, and in this learning process, every time we have a conversation, I learn something. I actually wanted to draw you out on something on that last, towards the end. You said that information and action are merging, and maybe you could expand on that a bit. Keith Hammond, our colleague, said that journalists and editors increasingly having to become, was your phrase, a social organizer? Right.
And I know the documentary film industry is dealing with this as well. So it used to be that a journalist might have a value of saying, I just focus attention, I uncover the facts, and I put them out there for others to do with as they wish. There's also, sometimes it's framed from a point of view, and so it's trying to be directional in some forms of journalism. But then they used to sort of say, and that's the end of my obligation, then I'm out. I'm not further down the transaction channel. But increasingly, the action and the creating of the information are going on in much closer in time, and more journalists being drawn into what I call the transaction channel. So that's to watch, interesting. We want to invite our colleagues who are actually doing real work, Bill, out there in the world, making a change in the world. We wanted to invite them up and hear a little bit, hear their stories and interrogate them. You have their bios, and so we'll dispense with the official introduction. Our other panelist was not able to be with us today. His visa was denied. Gregor, did you want to get us started?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Thank you, Bill, for this very inspiring introduction. My name is Gregor Hackmack, and I'm the co-founder of a website that's called Parlamentwatch, that has been we founded in 2004 already, and it gives the people in Germany, the citizens, the possibility to put forward public questions to the members of parliament and to get public responses. And the good part about it is actually that all the responses, all the answers from parliamentarians are saved on the platform, and it builds up to a virtual voter's memory, which is a great source of resource, not only for journalists, but actually for citizens to follow up questions. We've been doing this principle and applying that since the last federal elections in Germany in 2005, also to the candidates. So we gave citizens the possibility to enter the postal code, find their constituency, find a short bio of all the candidates, and if there were questions, they could put forward the questions and get public answers. And the good part about it is that even after the elections, you can follow up on promises that candidates made in their election campaign. And now in 2009, we have the second federal election that we will be covering. And in the meantime, we've been following our representatives, our members of parliament, through their parliamentarian work, or through the work in parliament, recorded not only what they said, but also what they did in parliament. So you find a voting record on each member of parliament, you find their committee membership, their extra earnings, and obviously also like in how far they answered and responded to citizens. So how does that actually affect, like the new media? First of all, we gave people a chance to directly participate. They don't have to wait for a journalist to come up with a certain topic or to ask a certain question, but actually everyone can get on the web in a sort of 24/7 press conference and ask their members of parliament. And because it's public and because we are cooperating with the traditional media, we are like cooperation partners of like online media where you don't even have to leave your like Spiegel Online, for instance, or other media websites. You don't have to leave them to ask your members of parliament. You can just enter the postal code in the political section. You got a question about a certain topic, a certain media article, and you're instantly on the profile of that person responsible for that political decision, pose your question, and get your answer. And our role in this field is actually to be the moderators. We want to ensure the values that there's privacy, there's like no private questions, no insults, to ensure that there's a safe space both for citizens and for members of parliament. So we're not actually consider ourselves being the journalists, but to ensure like a certain conduct, a code of conduct, and to ensure certain values on that platform. So that's what we are doing actually in Germany. And it's been running quite successfully now. We just expanded to Austria and from next month on to Luxembourg. And you can find Parlamentwatch on the state level in Hamburg, on the federal level in Germany, and on the EU level. We've got about 300,000 visitors each month, up to 3 million page impressions. And the interest is just growing, especially since we're approaching the next election. And it's already been changing government departments as well, because members of parliament, 95% are actively participating by now, because it looks really bad if you don't give responses to citizens. Actually, one member of parliament had to resign about 1.5 years ago because it turned out that he never responded and he missed half of his votes in parliament. So the biggest tabloid in Germany titled, "Is he Germany's most laziest member of parliament?" And the public decided, yes, he is, and he lasted another 6 months. And then he had to resign and even donated like his resignation money, about 40,000 euros, to a charitable organization. Unfortunately, not to us. But I mean, it just shows the effect that you can have as a citizen by actually getting actively involved in the democratic processes that are already there, by just using new forms of technology. And it's really inspiring what people ask. Got all sorts of topics, all sorts of questions. It's really a fun project to work on.
Gregor, as we puzzle through this matter of values in the emerging world, I think you said that the code of conduct is an evolution for you all, that you're kind of continuously learning your way to it. So you have a curated conversation between citizens and the elected officials who are answering. You screen it. You do some kind of gatekeeping, but something. You didn't start out with a code of conduct, and now you're evolving one. What was that about?
Well, we actually had a code of conduct from the very beginning, but the code of conduct has been evolving with like the experience that we had in this process. And we have like a steering committee, like of curators. We even have like a constitutional judge on that committee. So if you don't agree on the moderator's decision, you can still turn to our like steering committee, who like oversees the process, and you can complain. And this committee is also like sort of adapting the code of conduct to like the necessities of the time. So that principle actually works quite well, but in a way we're investing a lot of time and resources in this moderation process. So if you have a question and your question is turned down because out of our view it's in breach of the code of conduct, then we inform you why we think it's in breach of this code of conduct. At the same time, we make this process transparent to the member of parliament that this question has been posted but not published by us because we think it's in breach of the code of conduct. Then they can complain like to another outside moderator, and if they don't get an agreement, they can still turn to our steering committee that would then get involved and make the final decision. So that's really important to us, and we are sort of educating people also. We have some people like actually just want to pass on their opinion, and we say, well, we actually want questions, we don't just want opinions. And so we feel being pressed into this situation of actually teaching people basic media skills. First of all, you address people, you be polite, you're not insulting people if you want to, and you're actually asking a question. And if you're making claims, then you better provide the sources as well, like by, for instance, posting a web link.
Sasha, you do some interesting work around the world. I wonder if you could share it with us.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to impress anybody in this environment with my story, but here's the story. In my previous life, I used to be a journalist, and I was running the biggest and the most important independent media company in Belgrade in the early 90s, before the war started. And you can imagine, in that, in the environment of such a restrictive and oppressive government, how difficult that was. So that experience actually gave me the idea that that should have been an organization, an international organization, a type of a World Bank type of a financial institution that would be providing financial support to independent media companies all over the world, because I figured Yugoslavia is not the only country in trouble, neither we were the only independent media company in trouble. So first step was to figure out if there is something like that. There was nothing like that. Then the second step was to invent something like that, which was easy. I did that. And then the third step was actually somewhat more difficult, which is to find financing for that. To make a long story short, it goes for 3 years. I finally managed to convince George Soros to put first $500,000 as an investment to that fund. It took, he was actually resisting for 2 meetings. On the third one, he said, it will not work, but here's, I'll give you a rope to hang yourself, which was in May of '95, and I'm not that type of a person who would do such a thing. So since '95, we gave about $90 million in funding to different media companies all over the world, meaning 23 countries. Those countries are widely known as developing countries. We call them majority world. We think there's a very important distinction there, but we don't have time for that explanation. It's about 186 projects. We are providing primarily loans and equity investments. Can be anything, investment or loan can be anything between $5,000 and $5 million. And lastly, our loss rate since '95 is really embarrassing. It's somewhere in between 2 and 3%. And all our funders, actually last 10 years, are telling us that we must be doing something wrong if our loss rate is so low. And I know the reason how we can resolve that problem, but I don't think it would be proper. Just 2 last things about MDLF. We are self-sustainable. So from the very beginning, we thought it is very, very important to be a self-sustainable organization, to have independence from funders, investors, and all the other potential influences. We started with our first strategy in '95. That one crashed royally in '98. Then we built based on that knowledge and experience. We started the second strategy in '98. That one crashed royally in 2001. when we launched the third one, which is actually the most simple and the most visible. We just didn't see it for 6 years. And that is that we also take equity positions in some of the companies which we give loans to. And over time, after we exited the first 2 investments that we made in late 90s, we actually now have, irrelevant in terms of numbers these days, but we have 3 years of operating expenses sitting on a bank account. So we are covered for the next 3 years of operations. And the last thing, if we still have time, do we have time? The last thing that I think is important about the organization is that we managed to tap into private markets. We issued, and I think that our underwriter should be somewhere here in this conference, Shari Barenbach from Calvert Foundation. They helped us issue investment notes in the US. So that is how US citizens can practically buy our bonds. For Europeans, we did something similar, if not more interesting, with Swiss private bank Vontobel, and those specific bonds are listed on the Zurich Stock Exchange. And basically, just the last point, if I may, what we were doing in mid-90s, and to just make a link with your previous conversation, what we were doing in mid-90s was actually something very simple. The media world was very simple, bipolar, good guys and bad guys, guys for press freedom, guys against press freedom. There were not too many things to think about. You would find a person, or you would find the change makers, as Ashoka calls them, or we call them change agents. In those countries, people who would bet their life on press freedom and projects that they were running, and you would just provide financing for them and just sit back and see how they're developing their projects. So that was in mid-90s, and it was, as I say, very simple. Idea behind financing them was that their companies and their work would, over time, become an institution which practically would be an institution of democracy in those transitional societies. Because sometimes independent media institutions are actually equally important as the whole branch of judiciary. Now, 15 years later, that is much more complicated. We are doing things in a very different way, and we are doing very different things. But I don't think I have time to talk about that. So we can either leave it for questions and answers or after the...
Great. And so I've lapsed as a moderator. You all should have index cards or pieces of paper or scrap or something around. Okay, good. It would be wonderful if we've inspired ideas and questions, if you jotted them down and sent them to the end of your aisle so that we could start to work them with you. Our colleague, Keith Hammonds, who actually is the leader of this effort at Ashoka, was going to help us, we got rid of it, capture them on a flip chart, capture some of the good thinking on a flip chart. But while you all are pondering and writing and sending your inspirations to the end of the aisle, I'm going to ask Sasha to continue on one thing. Much of your early work was in print form. And now I think you're thinking about a digital world and about the contribution you could make to a digital world. I think you're funding Global Voices, which Knight Foundation also funds. Why don't you just share with us how you're beginning to think about supporting digital news and knowledge?
Well, very simple. We were launched in 95. Already in 97, we started our something we called CAMP, Center for Advanced Media Prague, which was supposed to be a center to take technologies invented in the West and adopt them for the majority world and actually deploy them quickly there. Because we understood that cutting trees and printing newspapers is not going to be business forever. So therefore, we wanted to actually also steer some of our clients out of that business and get them into a digital world as fast, as soon as they could get there. Now, you can only do that as fast as the market for that develops, and something that is pretty well known in the West as this theory of digital immigrants and digital natives in the majority world has much more dramatic consequences. Just for if there are some who do not know the concept goes to divide the population into two groups. One is digital natives, that is a younger generation of people who were born into digital technology, feel very comfortable using it. When they were 5, they had their first DVD, they flip all of those buttons. And digital immigrants are a generation like mine. We are kind of try to catch up, but we still need 2 fingers to send an SMS, and we have to think about it, and we need 15 minutes for one sentence. Now, that is how it works in the West, where technology from PC down was accessible at the same time. Now, in the majority world, that is much more dramatic, and you practically have 2 totally distinct audiences. You have the audience that is actually still reading and buying newspapers. It will be reading and buying newspapers forever. And you have those that is already switched. There is practically no one in between.
Great, thank you. So now I have to get to work. And we really would invite your help in helping us think about the future world, building out this framework, and Keith is going to help us keep track of things. So let's see what we have here. Okay. Keith, I think that we should read the question from up here. Oh. Do we have a microphone? Help is on the way.
Okay, my name is Jussara Korngold, and I work with Saúde e Criança Renascer from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. And I was thinking, we are so much exposed to the bad news at 11, and so how could we break that? And I think that is very much related to education. People are used to believe that crime in the Central Park is more important than the 2009 Skoll World Forum. So we hear a lot about that on the news, but we don't hear about what is happening here. So I think a new set of ideas in terms of educating people, educating journalists to expose us more to the third sector news. And in terms of the web, what I was thinking, and I would love for myself to be able to have my favorites in the web news, where I would have it pop up the news about the third sector. So I would be constantly receiving information, and I think by having statistics about that, maybe later on we will be contributing to the change in the media by seeing how many people are actually accessing this kind of information and interested in hearing, the good things that are happening throughout the world. So,
does anyone want to respond to that? One thing it brings to mind for me also, this idea that Bill raised, and I must say when he raised it, it was head spinning for me. It set my thinking on a different trajectory. This idea of tools to help us envision and build the future. So you're asking to sort of change the norms of what people are interested in or what they're conditioned in, and journalists would hear that all the time, but unfortunately not that many people were interested. So what are the new tools? What are the new storytelling devices? What are the new platforms that might help to enable a real interest in this type of information? One of the places that I see it occurring is in the world of serious games. There's a company in New York called Area Code that really does gaming and engagement. There are games about thinking about conflict in the Middle East. There are games that enable you to think about oil and all the policy trade-offs regarding oil. I think they do cause you to sit in someone else's circumstances and start to learn perspectives. So there's an interesting emergence of serious games as a form of journalism that I think has a way of sort of looking at a future world and changing some of the norms. Yes, please.
Jan Erickson wrote a very interesting book and said that one of the main purposes for the press covering crime so much is that those are the stories that help people figure out the rules. They don't read law books, but they read the daily news in New York. And so there's a purpose served by some of that bad news. But then I think what Paula was heading here is exactly right, that we all really, really now need to know about the future. Where are we going? Where might we be going? And the conversation we're having here, how do we think about it? How do we each come out of here with an avenue that, oh, that's where the future is going, and I can see a need, and let me think about that. So I'm actually very optimistic. I think there's been a structural problem with the old press. I'm not sure about the new one, but it's been very hard for journalists to write about alternatives. It takes time and effort. They've got a deadline in a few hours, and they're afraid that it's going to be mixed up with advocacy. And so the press, the traditional press, has had a structural bias against the future that does not reflect the market demand. And I think that's a huge opportunity, and it's one of the reasons that the old press is losing out. If you look at the world of blogs, et cetera, you find that restraint has been removed to a significant degree. But we're still living in a world where very few people have that skill. And just to use another example, in the Gandhian movement uses storytelling and the media to get people to, he called it truth force, to get people to confront that their behavior is inconsistent with their operating in life based on empathetic ethics. And once people are faced with that, they will change. But every Gandhian movement in the world has succeeded because that is so useful to people that when an issue gets ripe, there is no restraint on coverage. King asked in Birmingham the key question, will the press come? And they did come because it was dealing with that fundamental need that people had. So I'm very optimistic. We'll still have the Jan Erickson need, but we've all got to figure out how to help think about, act about the future.
I want to stand on this moment about storytelling and values, and the Gandhi and the Martin Luther King quote. There's a question in here related to this. Do the new understandings into human behavior, i.e. that people are not rational actors, that aspirational stories are more influential in stimulating action than critical ones, does all that require that journalism rethink how free presses help societies improve? I think that what we just heard Bill saying was the power of the story at the time when the movement is, I don't want to say matured, but when it is moving in to a more normative situation where people are just horrified by what is going on, and they can no longer reconcile what they stand for with what's going on. And that's often when the press comes in and helps to highlight. This question, what I like about this question is that journalists have long known that human beings are not rational. And journalists developed all types of storytelling techniques exactly because of that. So information, as C. Everett Koop used to say all the time about AIDS prevention and cigarette smoking, information does not change behavior. It drives rationalists crazy. Information does not change behavior. Your relationship to information changes behavior. Your emotional attachment to that information changes behavior. Examples that Bill was just given, examples that we can all think of. So man is not a rational being, and journalists sort of understood that, and that's why you see stories told in so many different ways. And how that will happen in the new world, will be interesting to see. What's happening now, though, is as part of this relationship, information only exists in relationship to something else, right? It doesn't have meaning except as in relationship to something else. Increasingly, people are able to have larger social networks on the web who are a mediating force in providing information, right? It used to just be people you knew, or your family, or who you were in school with, and that. Now you can have a much larger network, if you would, of intermediaries adding meaning to your information, and I really need to wind down on that. I'm going to go to these guys to ask this one because it's way too hard for me. Is the theory of change behind traditional journalism out of date? It's a simple question. It's kind of to the heart of the matter.
Well,
Is the theory of change behind traditional journalism out of date?
I mean, well, our experiences are that, that journalists, there's still a place for journalism. So whoever is a journalist here, you're safe, as long as you do qualitative journalism. And as long as you sort of help people through that myriad of information. For instance, on Parlamentwatch, you got thousands of topics by now. You have like more than 100,000 answers. And for us, it's not as moderators, it's not our turn to set the agenda. So we still rely on journalists to sort of pick certain topics, see, like journalists search through the database, they pick topics, make them big, follow up. For instance, this member of parliament who had to resign, that wasn't like our work. It just started with the research of a journalist who discovered that on Parlamentwatch, this member of parliament is not responding, is not going to the votes. So he took up the story, and other journalists followed on, went to the constituency, asked other people, explored the story, presented it really well, and then got this whole campaign started. So that's not what we are replacing, but we could still, what we can do is like to contribute to like more trustworthy information, because when you didn't believe in that tabloid story, for instance, you could still turn to this member of parliament and say, well, is that actually true? Did you never respond? And you can check his profile and then, like sort of judge for yourself. So it's another stage of controlling journalism and actually to improve the quality of journalism and the trustworthiness. So maybe new forms of media are just an add-on to like sort of help journalists to get the facts right and to provide higher quality to their readers. And I'm sure that all of us would agree that if you want to get good news, and like you'd be prepared also to pay a bit for it. At least that's the experience in Germany. Like that, the biggest quality paper, like the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is well renowned for qualitative journalism, is actually the one that doesn't lose circulation at the moment, but it's actually improving.
Sasha, do you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, my answer is much more simple. I think that the answer is yes. I think that there is no journalism anymore the way we know it. There is no media company the way we know it. I think we are in that phase. I don't know if they still make it on desktop computers. There used to be that button that says reboot. So when you press the button, screen goes black, and then you wait in fear for 5 seconds, and those are 5 seconds. That is where we are right now. And we are waiting to see, when things come up again, how is it going to look like? And that relates to the company, to media company as the unit, because that was totally destroyed, does not exist anymore. To any individual formerly known as journalist, because, to be very honest, and I'm one of those, takes a lot of knowledge to become a orthopedic surgeon, not that much to become a journalist. There are people who were never trained as journalists and who are probably among the top journalists in all the countries. And to make the long story short, I think that the situation is much more dramatic and that we are in this chaos phase. A big bang just happened, and we have to try to do our best to put those pieces the way that it works well for us. And we have probably the next 2 to 3 years to do it.
So there are a number of questions here about trust. What can we believe? How do we know if we'll be able to believe it? I'll read some of them and give you all a little moment to think about it. With the exponential growth in online media, how do we address the blurring of the traditional separation of news and facts from opinion? Fact-checking and corrections by the media has been a problem for the traditional media. Those problems have been amplified with the internet. And there are other similar ones. How do we know facts? How do we verify them? How do we know what we can count on? Anybody ready? Bill?
Well, there's been a lot of comment about how the new media with extensive involvement and people everywhere and cell phone cameras everywhere, that we actually have an opportunity to improve the trustworthiness of the knowledge flows, plural. But so much of this turns on how we set it up. What sort of a framework are we going to have? I believe that this is such an important area. There are some things that are going to need the law, and that can be put in place in many different ways. But I think that we're seeing the self-correction going on. If you just listen to the comments here and the thrust of the questions and the thrust of the discussion yesterday, it has a lot to do with trust. And if you go back, why was Harvard's motto in 1640-something Veritas, truth? Because we're always struggling to find the truth. The guy with the lamp in Greece, Diogenes, we just having everyone involved increasingly across the world, instantly we have an ability to do checking if we get the architecture right and the framework right. So I'm actually quite optimistic. I can see someone who isn't.
My opinion would be that providing access to first-hand information, like in the, like with a website like Parlamentwatch, you don't have to rely on journalists asking certain questions at some press conference and then maybe taking some parts of it and reporting it to you. But actually, you can turn to those people that make that political decision, and they can inform you firsthand, and they, members of parliament have access to government departments, etc. For instance, there's been a lot of questions on arms control recently on Parlamentwatch, and so what civil servants at the government department, at the Foreign Office for Arms Control experience, that there's a higher demand of members of parliament turning to them and asking them and follow up on those questions, and suddenly civil servants recognize, well, actually, Parliament is above me, and I should do a good job and inform the public. So, it really changes, it enacts systematic change, even government departments that people don't directly turn to, but through their member of parliament, they can get a lot more information and thus also get more trustworthy information.
Yeah, I think this is the key issue, and I think this is the issue that it's not that I'm not optimistic, but I'm mostly worried about this. For several reasons. There's the whole set of literature that explains or argues that we are moving into something that is defined as post-fact society, and the things just need to be true enough, and they just have to be convincing enough to sell you whatever they need to sell. You see, this actually becomes a world, the abuse of internet in this sense and information in this sense can turn the world into this different mirrors in which everything you touch is partly true, partly not true, but you will, because you know part of that is true, you will buy the whole information, which opens this whole area for incredible manipulation. See, 20 years ago, Soviet Union, they thought that they can manipulate to the best way. There's only one voice, they control that one voice. What governments do now is they hire hackers to bring down Burmese oppositional site. The Burmese oppositional site is not going to be there. There are different governments, as you know, who are incredibly skillful and successful in controlling what you can access from within the country. And there is this whole cyber war going on about that. And one of the world-known experts on that topic is in this room, so I'm not going to talk about that. Here's the biggest problem. There's one solution is media literacy. We must become incredibly serious about that. That is one thing. And the second thing is, what I think is the biggest danger is, if you know that there is so much manipulation over there, you tend to go towards your group of people that you trust. Your group of people that you trust, your social group, tends to be people who more or less have the same political views and other views that you have. And if you are going to read and trust everything that they send in your direction, you will end up being in this echo chamber, preaching to the convinced and, going around sharing things that you all believe, and therefore you will have a society which will have these echo chambers without real agora. That was a purpose of the newspapers and mass media as we knew them to start with.
So mindful of all the great risks out there, I choose to be very optimistic about it, and only wish I had another lifetime to live and work in it. And my reason is this, that too many people have chosen or have been forced to remain on the sidelines, and we have not had the benefit of their knowledge, their wisdom, their experience, everything. And I feel this most strongly as I think about, this is a horrible way to describe it, but highly educated individuals who choose to hide behind their technical academic expertise and do not join the conversation, the sloppy conversations that citizens need to have to figure out what we believe and to set our policy and our shared course. So I'm excited that you can, as Clay Shirky so beautifully describes, you can say, here's a puzzle, and that talent you never knew was out there will rush in. And it's my fondest hope that everyone rushes in, from the extremely well educated to the extremely wise who may not have formal education. So in my world, too many people have opted out or have been marginalized, and it's just my hope that we can create a better world with more people in it.
I can't resist. Paula just articulated what an Everyone a Changemaker society is about. This is the fundamental change. When everyone has the skills and confidence to be a change maker, wherever anything is stuck or there's something you're worried about, everyone is on it. I bet you 80% of the people in this room have been thinking about the trustworthiness issue. I mean, just look at these two stories. I could give you many other stories of social entrepreneurs who are working on this. That, we don't know what the answer is. Because there isn't going to be an answer. Even if we get the answer, we'll need a new answer shortly thereafter because of the rate of change. But in an Everyone a Changemaker world, you have the antibodies right away. Wherever anyone is, when they've given themselves that permission, they're going to be looking for truth.
I think we're at the magic moment of parting company. I'd ask you to thank my colleagues here, and Keith, who got us organized.
Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to all the change you're going to make in the world and help us with news and knowledge. Thanks.
Thank you.